You're sitting in a chair right now. That chair probably has wheels, or it's built on legs that rest on a floor made possible by wheels. Your coffee came here in a truck with wheels. Your clothes were made in a factory moved by wheels. The device you're reading this on was transported by wheels. Every single thing around you exists because of wheels. Wheels are so fundamental to your existence that you probably haven't thought about them since you were 3 years old and learned to ride a bike. But here's the thing. The wheel is not natural. It's not something you find in nature. There are no wheels on animals. There are no wheels on trees. There are no wheels on insects. The wheel is a pure human invention, and it took us an extraordinarily long time to figure it out. Humans have been around for roughly 300,000 years. We've been anatomically modern for about 200,000 years. We've had language, art, and complex social structures for at least 70,000 years. We figured out fire 400,000 years ago. We figured out agriculture 10,000 years ago. We figured out writing around 3200 BCE. But we didn't invent the wheel until around 3500 BCE. That's only about 5,500 years ago. Think about that timeline. We mastered agriculture. We built cities. We created organized religions. We invented writing. And then we invented the wheel. It came shockingly late in human history. And when it finally arrived, it didn't come from where you'd expect. Here's the part nobody talks about. The wheel wasn't invented because someone needed to move heavy things. It was invented because someone needed to make pottery. Around 3000 BCE, in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, potters were using a simple hand-thrown technique. They'd sit on the ground, grab a lump of clay, and shape it with their hands. It was slow. It was inefficient. It was limiting. You could make bowls. You could make jars. You could make storage containers. But symmetrical vessels, thin-walled containers with uniform thickness, those were nearly impossible to create by hand alone. Then someone had an idea. What if we spun the clay instead of spinning our hands? What if we mounted clay on a horizontal disc and rotated it while our hands stayed still? The potter's wheel was born, and it was revolutionary for pottery. You could make symmetrical vessels. You could make them faster. You could make them thinner. You could produce them at scale. Suddenly, pottery production exploded across Mesopotamia. Archaeological sites show a dramatic increase in ceramic output after the potter's wheel became common. But here's where it gets interesting. The potter's wheel was already spinning. The technology of rotation was already understood. Humans had been using spindles for thread making for thousands of years before pottery wheels appeared. The concept of a rotating disc was not new. Spindle whorls, small weighted discs used in spinning, have been found in archaeological sites dating back to 8000 BCE. So the next logical step was obvious to someone. If a disc can spin clay, can't a disc also spin and carry things? If rotation can shape pottery, can't rotation also move cargo? The earliest evidence of wheeled vehicles comes from Mesopotamia around 3500 BCE, about 500 years before the potter's wheel became widespread in the archaeological record. So technically, the wheel came first. But the idea of the wheel, the conceptual breakthrough, came from understanding rotation through pottery and textile work. The two technologies evolved together, each feeding the other, each making the other seem more possible. It's not a straight line of cause and effect. It's a network of ideas, all connected, all reinforcing each other. The earliest wheels weren't round, by the way. They were thick wooden discs cut from tree trunks, usually made from 3 planks of wood held together with wooden dowels or pegs. These weren't precision instruments. They were crude. They were heavy, sometimes weighing over 100 pounds each. They wobbled, they cracked. They split along the grain. They were inefficient, but they worked. And once you had a wheel, you needed an axle. The axle had to be sturdy enough to support weight, but smooth enough to rotate without too much friction. Early axles were made of wood, and they were crude too. They were often just wooden poles that the wheel rotated around. There was no bearing system, no lubrication technology. The friction was immense. Wheels would wear down, axles would splinter. But again, they worked. Barely. And barely working was enough. The first wheeled vehicles were carts pulled by oxen, not horses. Horses weren't domesticated for riding until much later, around 2000 BCE, in the steppes of Central Asia. Oxen were slower, but they were stronger and more reliable. They were already domesticated. They were already part of Mesopotamian society. They were used for plowing fields. The Sumerians, who dominated Mesopotamia at this time, used these ox-drawn carts to transport goods across their cities and trade routes. And suddenly, trade became faster. Commerce became more efficient. A single ox-drawn cart could carry what 10 men could carry on their backs. Empires could move resources farther and faster than ever before. Military logistics changed. Supply chains changed. The entire structure of civilization became possible because of this simple technology. But here's what's crucial. The wheel didn't spread immediately. For thousands of years, huge populations didn't use wheels. The Americas developed sophisticated civilizations. The Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, without the wheel. The Inca Empire built roads that stretched over 25,000 miles across mountains and deserts. They moved massive stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons. They had the intellectual capacity. They understood rotation. They used rollers and pulleys. They used log rollers to move heavy objects. But they never made the conceptual leap to a wheeled vehicle. Why? Possibly because they didn't have suitable draft animals. The llama and alpaca could carry loads on their backs, but they weren't strong enough to pull heavy carts effectively. Possibly because their terrain, mountains, dense jungle, high altitude, made wheels less practical than llama caravans. Possibly because they just never thought of it. We don't know for certain. But the fact remains, the wheel was not inevitable. The wheel spread from Mesopotamia to Egypt around 1600 BCE. Egyptian chariots became legendary. Light, fast, pulled by horses. They transformed warfare. The Hittites adopted the wheel and became military powers. The wheel spread to the Indus Valley civilization. It spread to China independently, or through cultural contact along the Silk Road. Historians still debate this. It spread to Europe through the steppes. It took centuries. It took millennia. But once it arrived in a region with suitable animals and suitable terrain, it transformed everything. Here's what's remarkable. The wheel enabled trade. Trade enabled cities. Cities enabled civilization as we know it. The wheel is so fundamental that we often think of it as inevitable, as if humans were always going to invent it eventually. But we weren't. It took a specific combination of circumstances: the right animals, the right terrain, the right cultural moment, the right potter looking at a spinning disc of clay and asking, "What if?" This is the part that gets overlooked. The wheel wasn't invented by someone trying to invent the wheel. It wasn't invented by someone solving a transportation problem. It was invented by someone trying to make better pottery. It was invented by accident, by extension, by a side effect of solving a completely different problem. And once it existed, once the technology was proven, once people saw that it worked and could be adapted, it spread and transformed the world. The wheel changed everything, but it almost didn't exist at all.